Welcome to Door County, Wisconsin.
Located in the northeastern part of the Badger State, Door County is a charming and picturesque destination, known for its natural beauty and quaint coastal communities. Bordered by Lake Michigan to the east and Green Bay to the west, the county boasts stunning waterfront views, pristine beaches, and vibrant fall foliage that draws visitors year-round.
With its lavender, lighthouses, kayaking, and fishing, Door County offers a serene escape for nature enthusiasts, families, and couples seeking a tranquil retreat in the heart of the Midwest. All that would change in 2019 when a string of gruesome murders shocked the quaint coastal county.
This is the story of the Door County Key Killer, an unsolved string of serial killings claiming the lives of 7 residents and terrifying hundreds more.
So, we invite you to join us as we take a look into these crimes, the people involved, and the theories as to who may have been behind the whole affair.
Dearest listeners,
welcome to Locked Door County. Welcome back to this second-to-last episode of Locked Door County.
Today we plan to wrap up this mystery.
And next week, we hope to break down the case as a whole, discussing big theories and hopefully some of yours along the way.
But before we can, we need to give you the whole picture.
Or at least as much of the picture as we can.
Last week, we left off on the reveal that police found Boone Latup's missing car.
A car police were unaware was missing in the first place.
You see, after his death, the car was taken by police and then eventually given back to Rubina, who was in charge of settling Boone's affairs.
Partially against her will, might I add.
Now, Rubina was staying in a rental house near the lighthouse, where she would be the night the car goes missing, right from under her nose.
I'll be honest, okay? I grew up in Queens, and it's too quiet here. I need the noise to, to sleep, so I had white noise going, and car alarms have honestly lost all impact on me, and I don't need your opinions. I need that rust bucket back, or you can give me the write-up for insurance.
She was frankly over it.
Police would begin their hunt the same day Walnut's letter would go out, leading immediately to the car being found outside the hair and nail salon in Harry Marlin's strip mall.
Police would investigate the car and only find one real piece of useful evidence.
The missing cell phone.
Police, while searching the car, would find his cell phone inside the small fold in the driver's seat.
A place investigators were sure they had checked before.
Either way, this was a massive find, and it gave insight into the murder.
Not Boone's, but Andrea's.
In examining the phone, they found that Boone had been on the phone with Andrea for over 4 hours the night of his death, calls that led up to around 15 minutes before the estimated time of death, a time confirmed by the second autopsy done by Dr. Winehouse.
Theories brewed in the investigator's office, and the number one assumption to sprout was that Boone had learned of Philip's death and feared for his own safety.
We know for a fact that they were connected via the Schloss banking account and had a general paper trail of pleasantries.
But there was no history of 5-hour phone calls, not between the two men at least.
Police also continued to strain over what on God's green earth the bank account was for. Since Boone Latup, Tina Berg, and Maddox Rout weren't on the business board, they lost their core connection.
Special Agent Rivera's memo to the head of FBI white-collar crimes did lead to a small delegation investigating the account and general finances of the victims.
Issue is they would start the same day as the last murder in the case.
That's right, y'all. The last murder.
Picture it. Sicily.
Washington Island.
Washington Island, Wednesday, November 13th.
An island known for its beautiful views and copious lavender farms.
Lavender farms we have heard of before.
A member of the Door County Business Board, 54-year-old Flora Warburton owned and ran one of the largest lavender farms in the world, a farm on Washington Island.
Flora was born and raised on Washington Island to a family of lavender farmers. She was the second of 4 siblings.
She would leave the island for a significant period only once in her life.
To study abroad in Amsterdam.
She had gone to study art and wanted to be a painter. She said she was inspired by the tulips and wanted more than anything to learn in the City of Flowers.
Which is technically Peshawar in Pakistan, but you get the point.
She had spent 3 years in Amsterdam developing a style and love for European art and culture.
But sadly, her dreams would be crushed by the death of her elder sister, Lily. Their mother would spiral into a depression, and inevitably her remaining 2 sisters would beg her to come home and take over the family business.
You may be wondering why they couldn't.
Well, Rosa Warburton had terrible hay fever and moved to Arizona the second she was old enough, and Petunia Warburton was a paraplegic, which would reasonably make farming hard.
Anyway, Flora came back and learned that Lily had planned to remodel the property and had already raised a good chunk of change to do it.
Flora took influence from her time in the Netherlands and rebuilt the farm to look like a Van Gogh flower fantasy.
She would officially take over that farm after her mother's death and run it until hers.
As her body would be found mangled among the flowers in her greenhouse.
She would be found by her business partner, Winnie Conrad, another name we've heard before.
Police would arrive to the scene and note these important details.
Victim is found face up on the floor in the greenhouse. The victim is coated in blood. Clearly bludgeoning, but no blunt force weapons are found.
And most importantly,
victim has a key ring laying on her chest, threaded onto her necklace.
She was photographed as is and taken to Dr. Winehouse.
It was there a further detail would be discovered about the keys.
There was a twist. The key ring had a small key left on it. I learned this when I tried to remove the ring and found it was stuck. The remaining key was lodged into the victim's ribcage between left 3 and 4. The only reason it didn't bleed is the lower wound at the base of the head, and the fact that the key remained in the wound and acted like a sort of cork.
Dr. Winehouse also noted an opinion about the patterns of violence in this memo to Agent Riviera.
Assuming all presented victims are from the same killer, we see an interesting juxtaposition in murder weapons. Dr. Philip Hayes and now Miss Flora Warburton, and to an extent one could argue Miss Jacqueline Wright-Charles and Miss Tina Berg, were all victims of blunt force, with Miss Wright-Charles joining Mr. Andrea Aginato on the list of stab wound victims. Finally, Mr. Boone Litup and Mr. Maddox Rao suffered unique injuries, with strangulation and a gunshot wound. My point is this. Normally, serial killers find a way to kill and stick to it. But this killer has gone between Modi all willy-nilly. I, once again, urge you to take into account the possibility that this is more than one killer. I will not deny the fact that there are key overlaps here, but this all seems just too strange.
And Agent Riviera did take this into account and requested her team look into the possibility of the existence of multiple killers working together.
But she was also busy investigating the murder itself.
Let's get back on track and jump into the timeline.
And today that's pretty easy, as most of the names are names we've heard before. And by most, I mean all of them.
Thank God, my notebook was getting so full.
Same here. So, where do we start?
Flora lived in an apartment building above the storefront on the farm property, meaning she was there around the clock. In the off-season, she has one employee and one business partner.
As we learned in episode 3, Flora edged out Winnie Conrad's floral shop and then saved it from bankruptcy by buying the business and making it a subsidiary of one of her farms. Winnie was resentful, but seemingly did get over it.
The other employee is a name we discussed in the last episode, Maddox Sproul's girlfriend, Virginia Lively. She normally worked there only in the breaks from school, but when the school shut down after Maddox's death, she took a job with Flora to pass the time.
His mom didn't care, so I picked the flowers for his funeral. He would have hated me telling anyone, but he liked flowers. He loved flowers. And I couldn't care less about him. But he loved them, so I would get him flowers from work. I was there ordering an arrangement since I knew Flora would do it for free, and she offered me a job until school started back up. She said she was planning a trip and needed someone to watch the store.
Planning to take a trip.
Interesting.
They're always planning something big before they get murdered.
Every time. Anyway, November 12th is the last day that she's seen alive at the store, and consequently, it is the day of Maddox's funeral, which places Virginia hours away.
Flora met with 3 clients that day, Rubina Levi, Carlotta Hayes, and Nina Aganato. She also had a noted conversation with Winnie that we'll get into.
Now, you may be wondering why all 3 clients were connected to the main male victims. Well, Virginia didn't get the free flowers just because she worked there.
Flora publicly announced she would donate flowers to the graves of the victims, meaning Rubina, Carlotta, and Nina were asked to come in and speak with her. She had met with Robert Charles the day prior and had been in active contact with her employee, Virginia. It should also be explained that Tina would be sent back to her home in Kentucky to be buried alongside her parents.
That day, Winnie met with Rubina around 10 a.m., where they decided on red and white roses. Rubina left around 10:30, and then Carlotta Hayes would arrive at noon.
The main security cameras outside the front of the shop would see Winnie go outside at around 12:30, her face seemingly frustrated.
Moments later, Carlotta would storm out, flipping Flora the bird on her way.
Finally, at 2 p.m., Nina would arrive. Notably, the appointment was supposed to be at 1. After about an hour, Nina would exit holding a plastic bag with a large vase of peace lilies.
About 5 minutes later, Winnie would do the same.
Without the peace lilies. Here's our first issue, though. The security camera is motion activated. That means the camera turned off about 10 minutes after and wouldn't turn back on until Winnie arrives the next morning at 10, where she would find Flora's corpse.
But that doesn't mean our timeline ends there.
No. Flora would send out an email to all three women about an hour later at 3 p.m. and then answer an email from Robert at 6.
But that is the end of our timeline.
So who killed Miss Flora in the greenhouse and with what?
And what about her scandalous love life may have led to her bitter end?
All of this and more after we return.
Welcome back to the second last episode of Locked Door County.
Before the break, we learned more about Flora Warburton and the events leading up to her gruesome murder.
Now let's take a look into possible motives that could have led to them.
Let's start with my personal favorite angle, an angle involving everyone's favorite murder suspect, Hetty Lynn Spackle.
And fan favorite, vigilante Teddy Sturgeon.
Basically, Flora had been in a sort of love triangle with Teddy Sturgeon and Hetty Lynn. The story begins shortly after Ralph Modell, Hetty Lynn's dead husband, died, which dead husbands often tend to do.
Hetty Lynn forced herself to try new things without him in an attempt to get back out there.
One of those things was gardening, mainly because without Ralph, their yard would soon fall into utter shambles.
Hetty Lynn would visit the farmer's market and strike up a conversation with Teddy Sturgeon, who had been selling flowers from the lighthouse garden, and asked him if he would be willing to help her learn how to take care of her garden. He says yes.
And a beautiful relationship starts to bloom.
Oh, shush.
Flora, however, was not happy, as she and Teddy had also been in an on and off relationship for the past few years.
Of course, they were in that off period at the time.
Flora would see them out at dinner on a date and resolve to get Teddy back.
Hetty Lynn was still not fully over Ralph and was okay with Teddy also seeing Flora, but Flora was not okay with Teddy also seeing Hetty Lynn.
Which is the start of a problem.
General animosity would begin to grow between the two.
Oh, so you get to make puns?
I said shush.
And by the present, Flora had made a few less than well-veiled snipes at Miss Spackle.
Snipes that Miss Spackle was not too shy to send right back.
And in a strange twist of fate Olivia Newton-John will be very proud of, Hetty Lynn and Teddy were seen at an antique shop just 3 minutes away from the farm and a 15-minute walk away from the shop.
So police decided to ask just a few questions.
She was being a snot. Why can't we just be adults? I mean, jeepers. I was all discombobulated after Ralphie died, and Teddy helped me with a garden. We were friends, and she was intimidated that he could have friends. She made a few sideways comments, and I made a few back, but I wouldn't kill her over it. Now, Teddy does have a fiery streak.
So police turned to Mr. Sturgeon, who claimed he would never hurt Flora and that deep down he did still love her. He did add, however, that Hetty Lynn and Flora had gotten into a fight the night prior, and he didn't suspect Hetty Lynn of violence, but wouldn't put it past her.
And so police turned back to Hetty Lynn.
He said, what? Yeah, she crossed the line. I was really angry, but I wouldn't hurt her over it.
So, that leaves us with the second angle, which takes a deeper look at Winnie Conrad. We know Winnie has always had an underlying contempt, but apparently that underlying contempt may have surfaced that day.
One major moment from her last day was the explosive meeting with Carlotta, but apparently it wasn't Carlotta who caused the tensions, but Flora.
She was standing up for me.
The meeting was about flowers for my husband's grave. I wanted white carnations and roses with violets and bluebells since he liked blue, but Winnie suggested we use a stronger flower. And Flora snapped at her about something. I assume I don't know them as well as Phil did. Anyway, she said some pretty mean things about how Winnie should be glad Flora saved her from destitution and how she should know her place. But then Winnie shouted something about how Flora was the only one trying to bail on the whole business, and the fight grew until Flora called her an ungrateful little...
Not a good look, Flora.
Point is, Winnie stormed out and Flora tried to act all nice when I told her how she had treated Winnie was wrong. She told me I should be the one talking since I killed my husband, at which point I told her to kindly shove it and left.
So, Flora was not a daisy.
Now that was a good pun.
Thanks. Police mainly took interest with what was said about Flora trying to, quote, bail on the business.
So they asked Winnie.
Flora came to me the day before she died and tried to sell me her part of the company. She said she was done with Door County and wanted to move to Amsterdam. I said no, mainly because I didn't have the money. But she lowered the price, and I realized there was more to it than just a midlife crisis. I told her to take a week, and if she still wanted to, I'd buy it. Then she died. I think she knew they were coming for her. Like the rest of the people on that account.
But Agent Riviera maintained her suspicions.
Because of what she said here.
I left after Nina did and went home. Nothing happened after that. It was over by then.
Excuse me?
I meant the meetings for the day, not her.
Let's take a tangent to a new segment I like to call Amy Riviera Sees Through the Bowl.
This is what she really thought of Winnie.
I've seen this before. They kill to get the shares and then make it look like the dead one wanted them to get the shares before they died to make it less suspicious. I saw it with the Nichols case. Same exact thing. Partner A kills Partner B for the power and makes it look like they were gonna get it in the first place. Winnie always resented her to take her business and had the perfect opening to take it back. Plus, Flora had planned to go to Amsterdam, but the tickets were round trip. She was smart to reference the Schloss account. Do we have a confirmation Flora was tied to it?
The answer to that question is yes. Only 3 days prior had they gotten a full list of people connected to the account through the head of the white-collar crimes.
But that information arrived the day of the murder along with the 2 agents sent to work on the case.
So who all was on the account? Let's take a look.
Now, as we know, the prime signatory was Mr. Boone-Latop, but other signatories included Mr. Andrea Aganato, Miss Flora Warburton, Ms. Jacqueline Wright-Charles, Dr. Philip Hayes, DDS, Commissioner Ross K. Mespel, and the Honorable Mr. Stephen Black. Signatory witness was Miss Christina Berg, Esquire.
So we know all of those names, and so did Amy. Of the 8, 6 were dead and 1 was missing, so police made a beeline for Commissioner Mespel, who had not come into work that day.
That should have been the first suspicious thing.
When they arrived, they learned something more worrisome.
The door was ajar, and inside his living room, Commissioner Ross Mespel sat in an armchair, his brains painted across the wall behind him.
The gun was in his hand, and on the table beside him was a sealed and handwritten letter in a Ziploc bag, and an empty bottle of 1893 whiskey.
A bottle valued at $1.13 million.
Police locked down the scene, and after a short investigation where they found no evidence of tampering, they sent Ross to Dr. Winehouse, whose only note in the case was this:
That was suicide.
Once again, Dr. Winehouse is a straightforward professional.
Police then opened the letter.
It said this.
Dear Door County, I'm sorry. They say the devil rings when you're most likely to pick up, and in my case, this was true. I was involved in illicit conspiracy and put people at risk for my own gain. I was aware of criminal activity and looked the other way, and I knew that if it came out, my life would be over. At least this way I had control. I'm sorry.
Let's take another break.
Welcome back to this second to last episode of Locked Door County. Before the break, we learned theories as to why Flora was killed and then the names of those on the Schloss banking account. Names including Commissioner Ross Mespel, who would later be found to have taken his own life.
So with all 8 members either missing or dead,
the question arose over what would become of the account.
The answer was found in a clause deep in the fine print, as always.
A set of names that we know very well.
And no, it's not Hetty Lynn again.
But Nina Aganato and her mother. Well, technically it was left to Boone's dead wife, but after that, Nina and Julia.
What that means remains unclear, as the account was set to basically self-destruct in the case that even one of them died under suspicious circumstances.
But it also didn't help that something massive would happen. Not in the case, well, sort of in the case, but mostly for the Aganato family just days later.
Because it was the 15th of November that Phoebe would wake up from her coma.
With acute trauma-induced retrograde amnesia.
So basically, she remembered nothing from the day of her attack.
Police tried to interrogate her, but Julia stood in the doorway asking them to give Nina, Enrico, and Dante time to be with their sister before police re-locked the room down.
Police had feared the killer may come back for Phoebe, and so they stationed 2 armed guards outside of her ICU room. And they also feared that if word got out that she was awake, they would try harder to silence her.
This meant the family was technically not even allowed to be in her room to see her in the first place. But Nina threatened the officers and was eventually allowed in.
After about 15 minutes, Nina and the boys left and allowed Phoebe and Julia to speak for a moment.
I needed to apologize. Our last talk was that fight outside the Wright Charles's house. I was beating myself up inside at the thought that that was our last talk. I needed her to know I was sorry.
For 6 minutes.
You timed my chat with Phoebe?
The officers mark entry and exit times. I did the math.
After Julia left, 2 agents and Phoebe's neurosurgeon would enter and attempt to question Phoebe, who sadly remembered nothing.
After this, the investigation continued down a pretty straight but aimless path.
A path with 2 major bumps. The first would come a few weeks later on the 29th of November with a shocking twist.
Another disappearance.
But this time it wasn't a suspect, but an investigator.
I think you know where this is going.
Special Agent Amy Riviera would tender her resignation and check out of her hotel at 2 a.m. and fly back to Columbia. All that was left in her room were her service weapon badge and a pile of letters that said things like, "You're next, leave while you still can," and "They know everything now, you're running out of time."
A letter she compared to the previous warning letters they had received and found to be a handwriting match.
Amy Riviera would remain in hiding in Columbia and not speak publicly again.
Until her self-inflicted death by overdose of sleeping pills in 2022.
This is what her suicide note said.
The letter said, "They get me, and I fear they have. I can't live like this anymore. Not with the guilt and fear. They didn't kill me with a knife or gun, but they destroyed the woman I was, destroying her soul. I am sorry for the people of Door County. I am sorry for the victims. And most of all, I am sorry for Detective Olivia Walnut. She was my friend, and I promised her I'd solve the case. That promise haunts me more than anything else. Good night."
This leads us to the last roadblock.
Wait, no. We still have a few details
But
first.
it would have been so poetic.
Isn't it already?
It's kind of just sad.
It's a tragedy. She was forced to turn away to save her own life, and in turning away, she died on the inside, and that necrosis spread, destroying her psyche. That's solid tragedy.
I get that, and it makes sense, but still.
In saving her own life, she sealed her own deadly fate. Anyway, Detective Walnut responded to the mass tragedy by trying to get her job back.
Which she was unsurprisingly denied.
But that obviously didn't stop her from continuing to investigate.
And it's that continued investigation that led to the last whammy revelation in her career.
Maddox was tied to the account, too.
Olivia Walnut, posing as a lawyer working for Tina's estate, found an old copy of the contract from its first signing, a copy with an extra name on it.
Addison Rao, Maddox's father, the deceased priest.
It stipulated that in his death, Maddox would take his portion of the account upon his 18th birthday.
This means all 7 victims were signatories or beneficiaries of the Schloss account.
Just as Amy had suspected.
Now sadly, as Gigi implied, this would be the last major moment in her career. Shortly after bringing this information to the remaining investigators,
who were leaving town in droves out of fear,
she would collapse in a grocery store and remain hospitalized for 3 days.
In those 3 days, multiple figures would come and speak with her, including Robert Charles, Hetty Lynn Spackle, Dr. Marilyn Winehouse, who had promised to keep her updated on the investigation, and finally, on the 6th of December, Julia, who after visiting Phoebe stopped in to talk. They would speak for a few minutes before Julia would exit and note Detective Walnut seemed strange.
Her doctors reassured Julia that she was in full kidney, liver, and pancreatic failure, and that with the meds she was on, she would be a little loopy. To be more specific, she was on a very high dose of pain meds.
Either way, she was in hospice care and had a signed DNR. She had requested they turn her heart rate monitor off, which is why it took nurses until dinner time, about 2 hours later, to realize that she was dead.
Detective Olivia Walnut died on the 6th of January at 4 p.m. Beside her, a small handwritten note that read,
It is done.
Her exact cause of death remains unknown, but theories were listed by her doctor, Dr. Jennifer Thompson.
Cause of death could be many. Patient suffered from acute liver, kidney, and pancreatic failure, all of which had stemmed from stage 4 cancer. Patient was also on appropriately high doses of hydromorphone for end-of-life pain regulation. As much as I would love a straight answer, patient did not wish for an autopsy. Time of death is approximated at 4 p.m.
The investigation, having now lost 2 of its biggest leaders, began to falter.
Special Agent Gregory Parrish would be brought on to ride out the rest of the investigation, but would notably leave by January when no more evidence and no more victims were found.
A small but ineffective task force would remain until the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Dr. Winehouse would hold top precedent in their time for the Door County key killer investigation. Sadly, though, it would never really pan out, and they'd be pulled away into another investigation in late February. One they would solve within 2 weeks.
Of course they did. And sadly with that, we end this episode of Lockdoor County, a case that to this day remains unsolved.
But that doesn't mean there aren't
theories.
So tune in next episode as we dissect some of those theories and some of yours too.
You can contact us on Instagram at Truer Crimes or email us at truercrimes@gmail.com with your theories for a chance to be mentioned in the finale.
We can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Thank you for listening. This has been an episode of Gonsbach Productions presents Truer Crimes, Loch Door County. The story, all names, characters, and incidents portrayed in this production are fictitious. No identification of actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, and products are intended or should be inferred. Theme music track composed and mastered by Carlos Ortiz.